What up, what up? Getting into it once more here in the TCA studio in beautiful Bytown, Canada. Matt Robinson along with you as always. Thanks for checking this one out today. Glad you're here. Give us a follow as always if you haven't done so already on social media at Tall Can Audio, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever app you're hearing us, or at any time. Just visit tallcanaudio.com. I don't know what to say about this one. It's been kicking around in my mind for the last few days, but I wasn't really sure whether or not to go at it. And then I posted something up on our Twitter, which, as I mentioned, is at Tall Can Audio, and it blew up a little bit. And you people seem to have strong takes. And from that, I saw an awful lot of people bookmarking and kind of taking note of the fact that I said, all right, like if this is something you guys are that interested in, we'll get into it on the show here today. And so I do believe there are some new listeners here, and if our regular listeners will excuse me for just a minute, I want to welcome those people in. And the concept of the show here, if this is your first time, is it's pretty simple. Let's talk sports and have a beer. Let's hang out at the pub table and just shoot the shit a little bit. And we don't take that lightly. We actually have to have a beer while we do it. So at the beginning of most episodes, and I should say most episodes, have a co-host or have a guest, somebody for me to yammer away at, to blather back at me. But occasionally, and sometimes a little more than occasionally, it is just me. But that doesn't mean we won't have a pint. And so, normally we'll try a local craft beer, try and support a small business that way, shout them out before getting into things. And today will be no different. This is one of my favorite craft breweries out of Ottawa. This is from the Nita Beer Company, their OPA. Not to be confused, of course, with an IPA, but meant to be confused a little bit. An Ottawa Pale Ale. The guys over at Nita have been with this show for a long time. The Nita family, awesome people. They are on Colonnade Road or at nitabeer.com. Check them out. Grab one of these. Grab a Perfectum. St. Patrick's Day also just around the bend. They got some beauty St. Patrick's Day beers coming up. Lots to check out there. So I should mention before we dive too deep in that up now from yesterday at tallcanaudio.com or the next one down in the app you're hearing me right now, we had the legendary play-by-play voice of the Ottawa Senators. Dean Brown was here, and lots of good stuff to get into with him. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the Ottawa Senators, but also sports gotten a little too chummy. We were watching there on Monday night, Randy Arozarena tee off at the World Baseball Classic on Cal Rowley after refusing to bump fists or shake hands. As that stuff kind of more and more permeates sports now. Buddies all over the place. Guys you played junior with, guys you used to be on the same team with, guys you played internationally with. When you get on the ice, when you get on the field, when you get on the court, whatever, is it okay to be buddy-buddy? Is it okay to be a dick? We asked him a little about that. Plus the fact that the NHL is staring down some really interesting, kind of fun and fresh new matchups for their Stanley Cup playoffs this year. And what some of those could look like. The Ducks look like they're going to be in. The Sharks might be in. Utah looks like they're going to be in. Montreal in again. Buffalo getting in. We're starting to see a bit of a turning of the page. That means some new and fresh matchups. We talked to Dean about that as well, because some of that looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. So go back, check that one out. Like I said, it is the previous edition up at tallcanaudio.com or the next one down in your favorite podcast app, wherever you're hearing me right now. Look, the reason that we're here today, or the thing that fired up this conversation, was Bell Media, as they so often do, put out a press release on Tuesday morning that sort of indicated they won trade deadline day again. And this is an ongoing thing between them and Sportsnet. And it comes out often on trade deadline day. It comes out after free agent frenzy, whenever these networks still go head-to-head, which honestly isn't that often. Certainly you'll see Sportsnet do the same thing, coming out of big Blue Jays games, obviously after the Blue Jays playoff run back in the fall, or big Stanley Cup final numbers, or whatever it might be. They get out there and they toot their own horn a little bit when they've had a big night, and as does TSN, and they did here. But those things aren't up against each other very often, right? Like when TSN has a giant World Juniors, well, Sportsnet wasn't covering that. When Sportsnet has a big baseball broadcast, TSN didn't have that. It's really very limited circumstances where they go head-to-head anymore. And that's because Sportsnet and Rogers has the national rights. When it comes time for the playoffs, it's all them. When it comes time for the draft, it's all them. Outdoor games, Four Nations face-offs, these sorts of things are all going to land on Sportsnet, and TSN won't be in the mix. So Rogers can certainly still get out there and let you know when they had a big night, but they didn't necessarily beat anybody to do it. Maybe they beat their own numbers a little bit. Like you could set a network record, and they did that a bunch of times with the Blue Jays last summer. But really, it's only these two occasions, Trade Center and Free Agent Frenzy, where they go head-to-head anymore. And I think what we've come away with here, and man, you guys were fired up in the replies on social media, is it's TSN has beat them again, and you guys have strong opinions on why that is. And there were those of you out there, don't get me wrong, who absolutely said, hey, I watched Sportsnet, I enjoy it a little more. Elliott's more reliable, or it's a little less, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, there was lots of words out there. It comes off a little more professional than TSN. And there was a wide array of opinions on this sort of thing. And I want to get into that because I thought your comments were interesting. I think the fact that Rogers has had over a decade now to build up their viewership and they still can't push TSN away is interesting. So we'll get into a bunch of that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in TSN's press release earlier this week wasn't just that they beat Sportsnet, and I guess I should put a couple of these numbers out there. I believe the press release here, 137,000 people on average were watching TSN throughout the Trade Center broadcast. So it actually sounds like a reasonably small number, and it is, but it's throughout the day on a weekday while people are at work. So you're not going to do gangbusters to watch panelists do their thing. But the thing that caught my eye is it was up almost 60% from last year. So forget what TSN did for a moment up against Sportsnet. This is just about beating themselves from a year ago. It also says they reached 1.3 million people, also up significantly from last year. And the reason this stands out to me is last year, Canadian teams were pretty good, right? Like the Oilers were getting ready to take another run to the Stanley Cup final. The Winnipeg Jets were about to win a President's Trophy. The Toronto Maple Leafs were winning their division. The Ottawa Senators were going to be back in the playoffs for the first time in quite some time. And the Montreal Canadiens, after going through a rebuild of their own, were suddenly back in the race as well. And so there was this anticipation going into last year's deadline that, oh man, like Canada's sitting pretty good here. Like there could be a lot of Canadian teams buying. This could be really interesting. Maybe I'll sit down and watch 8 hours of hockey panelists speculate on upcoming trades. And it turned out to be a reasonably active day. A lot of those teams did make significant moves. But I'm sitting here and I'm going, what on earth could have made more Canadians want to watch this year? The Canucks are terrible. The Flames are terrible. The Oilers are in a terrible division. They're not as good as they have been in previous years. I think we all assume they are going to make the playoffs and will probably be fine once they get in. Goaltending is always a question, but let's not drill down too deep on how the Oilers are going to do in the playoffs. So they're still hanging in, but they had already sort of, Stan Bowman had kind of come out and said ahead of deadline, yeah, we're probably done. Like, don't expect much out of us. The Winnipeg Jets, who I mentioned last year were in President's Trophy winning mode, are not in such a mode now. They've been better lately, and last I looked, they had sort of clawed their way loosely back into the race, but nobody expected that they would be buying. The Leafs are terrible. The Sens had pulled themselves back to within reach but I don't think we're in the same mode as they were last year. And the Habs are really the only team that I guess you would say in Canada are like clearly on the right track. Like we talked about the Oilers, they're going to make the playoffs. Maybe they fired up again. Maybe they're one of those teams that deserves the benefit of the doubt. Kind of like the Panthers or like the Lightning or whatever in previous years have become where, yeah, don't worry about us in the regular season. We know what we got to do to get in, and then they'll fire up. Maybe they deserve that. But Montreal is on the come up. So when you look across Canada at what all of these teams looked like this year versus what they looked like last year, you go, how did any network manage to draw not just a little bit higher ratings, but significantly higher ratings than a year ago? And forget what they did against their competition. Like, are we that kind of nation? Like, is the thought that everyone in Canada is going to be selling off its pieces and let's just sit back and watch how deep they might cut and how bad it's going to be? Is that more interesting? Is that more fun? Is that more entertaining than sitting there and going, oh man, I wonder what my team's going to get last year, right? Going into the playoffs as we try and stack up and see if we can get on a run here. That's not what happened. The viewership suggests we would rather watch the train wreck. We would rather see all these Canadian teams who are clearly out of it or just hanging on by a thread sell the farm instead of buy. You know, maybe that's me extrapolating a little too much based on just 2 different years, but that's what the numbers would suggest. It was a significantly higher viewed program this year than it was last year. And that was, like I said, a lot of Canadian teams in it last year who are definitely not in it this year. So that was just something I took away. And it's not going to be the main thesis here. Look, the thing that I tweeted out on Tuesday after seeing the press release was that this had to be absolutely maddening for Rogers, who has paid billions upon billions of dollars now to be the national rights holder in Canada. And they just re-upped again. So this started, 2014, 2015 years. It was a 12-year deal. And they just last fall announced an extension to that deal. And a lot of people thought, there's no way they'll do that. This has been a money loser. It was not successful for Sportsnet. I don't know that you can make a case that it was good for the NHL. I think a lot of people thought this would go back to what it looked like before Rogers grabbed the deal. And that's where everyone had a piece. CBC owned Saturday nights. TSN owned Wednesday nights. And the thought was going into that first Rogers deal that Rogers will get a Sunday night or a Monday night. And now we have 3 national rights holders. Regional rights will still fluctuate the way they always have. But now we got 3 big hitters here. Rogers came in, blew everybody away and said, no, we want it all. We will buy all of it and then we'll sublet. And we've seen from there, right? Sublease, whatever you want to call it. We'll give some games to CBC on their network at our discretion. We'll give some games or sell some games to Amazon Prime, but at our discretion. We want to control the whole thing. And we will block out Bell and TSN, frankly, at the time, in the hopes of killing them. And it didn't work. It wasn't good. Nobody was happy. Bell didn't like it, obviously, being shut out. Rogers didn't like it because they were being bled dry. If you remember, those first year or two, they had big panels and they got weird hockey. Like, let's get up here in our little skinny guy dress pants. And they had that board that you would take shots on. And Kelly Rudy's standing there with his goalie stick while Nick Kyprios is shooting at him. Weird shit. They tried George Strombolopoulos. They tried a bunch of things. And they promised you that on Saturday night, you will be able to watch any game you want. And they gave that 1 year. But you would be able to watch Penguins Islanders on City TV. And you would be able to watch, I don't know, whatever, Florida versus Nashville on Omni. And you'd have one game on Sportsnet Ontario and one on West and one on Central. You get the point. That lasted like 1 year. And then it went right back to, holy crap, that was expensive. We're not making the money we thought we would. I think in that first year, only 2 Canadian teams made the playoffs. They started firing people out from underneath, not just the hockey night bracket, but like Doug McLean was gone, Bob McCown was gone, Nick Kyprios was gone. They just started throwing people overboard. And ever since then, it's just been a fairly standard, not always bad, but not always good hockey broadcast. The same as everyone else has done forever. And so, yeah, when we got here last fall to a point where they were going to renegotiate and the league would kind of divvy things up again on what it was going to look like in Canada, I think a lot of people thought, yeah, they won't do this again. They'll sell off some to Bell or to TSN. They'll sell off some to Netflix or Prime directly or whatever. Nope. Rogers dove right back in and bought the whole thing again. That doesn't mean over the life of this that they won't sublease some games to somebody else, but they control the whole thing again. And so here we are, a decade, more than a decade into this, and any hope, as we mentioned off the top, right? They only have to go head-to-head with TSN twice a year. Like, they get to put out these press releases at Rogers and say, hey, most viewed first-round Stanley Cup playoffs in such and such history and blah, blah, blah. It's great. It's all real. It all counts. But you didn't have any competition. On the only 2 days where you have competition trying to run the same thing as you, we are more than a decade into this, and people are still choosing TSN. Overwhelmingly. Every time. I have no doubt that when they bought these rights, and they did spend all that money in the first year or two to try and create these big panels and this new look, and we're going to give you everything, they went into that going, we're going to break TSN. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen immediately. But there will be no reason for people to go back to TSN, right? Because we have the regional games for, at the time, it was 3 or 4 out of the 7 NHL teams. We have the national games, right? Hockey night in Canada. We have the draft. We have the All-Star game. We have the playoffs. Like, people will just get used to watching all their hockey stuff outside of those couple of regional games for the teams that we don't have. People will just get used to coming to Sportsnet and assume that hockey stuff in this country happens on Sportsnet. You saw it for a while. They tried it as a catch line, as a promo, the home of hockey in Canada. It didn't work. We are 12 years into this, and on just those 2 days, when you allow people to make their own choice, it's not a habit. They still choose TSN. So this wasn't a habit thing. People have had 10 years to make up their mind, and they have decided they like the other show better. Like, when you own all the rights and have the ability to dictate terms to everyone else like Rogers has, when you have Elliot Friedman, who, no matter what you think of him, is the most plugged-in insider left in the league. We did this on the Monday show. We talked about the fact that he broke 15 deals during trade deadline week. Second place was the teams themselves tweeted out trades before any insider got to them. And then the second place actual insider in Canada was Darren Dreger at 4. So Friedman broke 3 times as many deals as any other insider. He's the guy. That's the one person throwing it down now that Bob McKenzie is out of the game. And people are just like, yeah, I don't care. I want to watch the other show. And this is where we sort of circle back to the debate that was taking place in our mentions at Tall Can Audio on Twitter. Follow along. A lot of people said kind of similar sentiment. Yeah, I don't care. If I need to know right now, I'm on Twitter, refreshing every 40 seconds. Otherwise, yeah, maybe Friedman will say it at 2:46 and Chris Johnston will say it at 2:49. I don't really care about those 3 minutes. I'm just sort of out here taking it in. It's a work day. I've probably got it on in the background, or, the news will come out close enough that I don't really care if I'm 3 minutes behind the guy who's watching it on the other channel. And if I do care about that, I'm on Twitter, or I'm on Blue Sky, or whatever else, getting it that way. Otherwise, I just care about the personalities. So I don't really care who has it first. I just want a better show. And overwhelmingly, people have suggested that TSN is the better show. When I talk about the idea that this would have been somewhat expected from Rogers at the beginning, right? That it would take time to break down TSN's dominance in this and lure people over. And like I said, that hasn't happened. I wondered if this might be the year where you would see that chip away. And the reason is, this is their first trade deadline without Bob. Without the Bob father, right? And he's the guy. He's the first one to ever do that job, to kind of nail that down in this country and be the number one trusted insider. So you have him. You have the fact that TSN started doing this before Sportsnet 1,000 years ago. You have the built-in, I'm just used to turning it to TSN on this day. But this year they had no Bob. So would that have been the thing? Well, now Elliott's the guy. I'll go to Sportsnet and I'll watch their broadcast because I know he's now the most trusted, number one, most likely to break a trade. And it didn't matter. It did not matter. And look, as I had this discussion with a bunch of people online, there was sort of honestly, a bit of a shitstorm. I saw a lot of people painting Sportsnet. I don't even know if I should give this the time of day, but people saying their broadcast is too DEI. And I even had one piece of shit in my mentions who had to give that drive-by and also try and cover his, I want to make sure that I'm a big enough shithead on both sides. So he has to go, and there's at least enough good stuff on TSN to counteract Cheryl Pounder. Are you an idiot? At this point, is Cheryl Pounder outside the top 3 hockey analysts in this country? Clearly, you're an asshole. I get that. You want to make sure that you bury women or you bury whatever. You don't even get to make any sense with that. You don't even have the air of credibility to look. If you come at me and you say, I like James Duthie better than Ron McLean, or vice versa, or I don't like O-Dog, or I don't like Colby Armstrong, or whatever, those are all subjective. Those are all opinions, and they're fine. Some of you are choosing to voice those opinions a little more over the top than I think is necessary, but you're entitled to them. That's okay. But you can't come at me and want me to take you seriously when you go, well, I hate Cheryl Pounder, but there's enough other good stuff. That you're showing your whole ass out here, man. Everyone knows exactly what you're saying because Cheryl Pounder is very good at what she does. Jen Botterill is very good at what she does. You can decide for yourself which one of them you like better, but they're both very good at this. So if you come at me and you're like, Sportsnet's broadcast sucks because it's DEI, and I know exactly what you're driving at. It means TSN's is a very white man broadcast. I don't need that to be part of the debate, but it was part of the debate on social, so I'm just letting you know the type of shit that we're trying to wade through. But if you want to come to me and you want to say, yeah, you know what? I did miss Bob. I did think the TSN broadcast lacked a little bit of heft this time. That's reasonable. And a bunch of people said, but I saw James Duthie. And at this point, in this country, James Duthie is the face of big events. If I see James Duthie, I know this is a big deal. James Duthie, and this is why Bell paid him what they did. I kept seeing other people saying, Duthie should move to Sportsnet and take over Hockey Night. It's not happening. That is never say never, but that is not going to happen. He was already offered that. He was welcomed years ago and offered the opportunity to come be the face of hockey on Rogers Sportsnet, and he turned it down. He liked working at TSN, and they gave him essentially the Bob Costas deal. Hey, you will go to the Masters every year. You will go to the Super Bowl every year. You will still host the World Juniors, maybe our biggest cash cow, the FIFA World Cup. Whatever's going on that TSN has the rights for, and even when they don't, James Duthie goes. You just watched James Duthie host the Olympic Games on CBC. CBC had the ability to reach out to anyone they wanted from TSN or Sportsnet, and you saw that mixed panel. You saw Pounder, you saw Bieksa, you saw Friedman, you saw Cassie Campbell, you saw Mike Johnson and Chris Cuthbert on commentary. That was a great team. You have the choice to ask anyone you want in this country to be the anchor for the Olympic hockey tournament. You chose James Duthie. That was the right choice. And so we got that feedback a lot in our mentions. I said, well, I don't really care, but I was flipping between the two, and the one that has James Duthie carries some heft. Okay, this is the A show. This is the real show. This is where people must be because James Duthie's here, and I know that face, and that face is always where big things happen. That's where I trust the broadcast to be A level. So I think that also kind of took away some of the blow from losing Bob McKenzie. Because as I said, this idea that it would take some time to break down people's habit of always watching TSN and they would come over to Sportsnet, that obviously didn't happen, and that went out the window. I thought maybe the loss of Bob McKenzie would be the thing. Okay, now, does it start now? Like, without Bob, are people more willing to go to Roger? No. The answer was still no. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you every person on each panel I like or dislike. If you've been here for a while, you already know. I got my favorites, and I got my ones that I like less. There are talented people on both broadcasts, but the one thing that seemed to be pretty, it was interesting. We got lots of people in the mention saying, I watched Sportsnet. I preferred the Sportsnet. That's fine. Like, they are the national rights holder. They do a competent broadcast. But if you believe that Bell Media press release that said that 48% more people watch TSN than their, and I always laugh because they don't name Sportsnet, than our closest competitor. And this is Canada, right? We have two networks, so we know who your closest competitor is. 48% more people watched TSN than Sportsnet. So that doesn't mean nobody watched Sportsnet. So a lot of people did say they found that Sportsnet did a more professional broadcast. They like Elliott. They like David Amber. They like Kevin Bieksa, who has provided over the last several years some energy, some personality. I don't always agree with the guy, but he certainly comes from a place of experience. He's well-spoken. I got time to listen to Kevin Bieksa. So a lot of people kind of said that they like kind of that more professional vibe, which of course you can always argue against if you want. Lots of people didn't like that Biz had been brought in from the Chicklets thing, and people have their opinions on that. But we have seen on the TSN side, right? They do the skits, right? The Bob's Rolodex, and in previous years, the Bruce Boudreau screaming and cursing at the panelists as kind of an homage to his thing from that Road to the Winter Classic on HBO years ago. There was the llama thing. Like, I don't necessarily love those out of TSN. I don't hate them. I don't think it's, brutal television, but it's not really for me. But the rest of your panel has my preferred broadcast, and it has enough heft that I'll wait that out. Had Lester for a couple years there writing songs. That was fun. I did like that. But I'm more looking for just the straight up analysis, debate, and newsbreakers. And I think TSN is best for that. One of the other common things we got when talking about TSN was there's just way too many people. And there is. There are too many people there. We don't need all of them. Now, if you're going to go on television for 8 hours in a row, maybe it's a necessary evil. We got to be able to spread this out a little bit. We can't ask the same 6 or 10 people to talk the entire time. So perhaps for a show like this, it's just a necessary evil. But I do agree that TSN's is a little over-cluttered or a little overstaffed and could be pulled back a little. But like I said, maybe that's just a necessary evil. But as we sort of kick this around and hear the debate out from both sides, the counter-argument on Sportsnet to people who say, I like that one, it's a little more professional, it's a little less silly. There are just as many people on the other side saying, it's too dry. Like, there's not enough Bieksa there, or there's not enough. A lot of people said, I really like Friedge, but there's just not enough to hold him up. He can only break a trade so many times per day, especially on a slow trade deadline day like this turned out to be. And then they've got to throw it to somebody else, and that's where it seemed to fall down. It does feel like whether people like or dislike Sportsnet or like or dislike TSN, they do acknowledge Elliott's the man now for breaking deals. That is the top insider. But I'm prepared to wait 2 or 3 or 5 minutes or whatever to hear that same news on TSN, because the people in between are going to hold that up better. And I do wonder, right? You start to put all these things together. TSN was the first one to do a trade deadline show. They had the first Hockey Insider with Bob McKenzie. They had the heft of being a network that had been around longer. I'm using the word heft a lot on this show. It's odd. I'm not sure I've ever used it on this show before. Suddenly I've used it like 7 times on today's show. And when Bob would be back there with Gord Miller, and later on they started bringing in others, like Darren Dreger would sit at that table, and then Pierre LeBrun, and then Chris Johnston, and Gord Miller would always be kind of the traffic cop back there. But while those guys were working, you could throw it to Mike Johnson or Ray Ferraro and hear really smart insight out of those guys. And that could hold it up while you were waiting for Bob to do his thing. And that seems to be more than anything else that I took away when trying to break down what people like, what people don't like. There is a nostalgia, right? There is a habit to just going to TSN when you want to hear big news. But beyond that, people do accept that Elliott is now the big guy. He is Bob now. But there's just not enough else on those panels, on that program to just sit through while you're waiting for Elliott to break the next one. And that seems to be where it falls down. So, a couple other quick things here that came up that I thought was interesting. First being YouTube. And I had a couple different people say that they watched the TSN stream of Trade Center on YouTube and didn't even know the Rogers had done a show. Because a lot of people, right, this is a weekday, it's all day long, and so you're not at home in front of your TV flipping between channels. You're like, fuck, I don't know, I don't have the TSN app here, I don't have the Sportsnet app here. YouTube, maybe I can stream that on my work computer. How dare you? Maybe I can just put it up on my phone while I'm working away here. Where do I see it? Oh, look, there it is. There's James Duthie, there's Gord Miller. Okay, this is it. And if only one network is doing that, then you get a little goodwill there. Not only do you get their stream, not only do you keep them from going and watching the competition, you get them to go, oh, good. They made that available. Nice. Now, I find that interesting because it doesn't really count in your ratings, right? On TV, or now we do have to count streaming as part of your ratings, but it's typically through the TSN app or through tsn.ca that they will accommodate. It's rarely through YouTube. But you did make it available there to people for free. And so people appreciate that, right? And there is synergy to it. There is brand identification that just, oh, look, I recognize those faces. These are the faces I watch on deadline day. And maybe next year the deadline is a Saturday, or maybe next year you're off sick or whatever. And you see TSN, you stop and you go, this is what I watched last year. And I like that. So that was a big move, and a lot of people brought that up. I didn't even know that it was a thing. I didn't know they were doing it on YouTube. Like I said, this won't have helped TSN as far as ratings go. It does help as far as goodwill goes. Like, people will care about that, and people did like that. So that's another win for TSN as far as, like I said, even though it doesn't help them necessarily financially and being able to boast about it as part of their ratings, at least as far as the couple hundred people that were chatting away in our replies, that was big. And the other thing that I honestly hadn't considered, but that multiple people brought up, was radio. And Sportsnet does still have a little bit of sports radio presence out there, but not as much as TSN. And don't get me wrong, TSN has cut back as well, and savagely at times. But in a couple of these markets, like in Montreal, in Ottawa, certainly in Toronto at this point, but if you wake up in Ottawa a couple times a week and you hear Frank Corrado on TSN 1200, and the next day you hear Cheryl Pounder on TSN 1200, and the next day you hear Mike Johnson on TSN 1200, those people start to get worked into your universe. These are the people that I trust. I'm used to hearing these people. And it becomes nothing more than just default. These are the voices that talk to me about hockey. And so maybe you're somebody that for the most part couldn't possibly care less. When you throw on the TV on trade deadline day, I'll watch either one. I don't really care. But again, you flip around and you're like, oh shit, there's Frank Corrado. I thought he made a really good point about the Sens PK the other day. I'll stay here. Or about the Habs breakout. You know, he does their color commentary on a lot of their games in Montreal. Gord Miller is there at the insider's desk. He's normally a play-by-play guy, but I watch him every year at the World Juniors. I like his call. I'll stay for... Like, just being there kind of in the background throughout the year builds brand awareness, builds comfortability, builds trust in your people. And now, Rogers Sportsnet only broadcasts what? The Saturday Sens games and any playoff games. And for the most part, Ottawa fans aren't really happy with that coverage anyway. So give a Senators fans the choice on who they want to hear from. Jamie McLennan, Mike Johnson, Cheryl Pounder, and Frank Corrado. Or I'm not even trying to be an asshole. Like, I'm a sports media nerd. There were a lot of guys. There were a lot of people on that Sportsnet panel I barely recognized. That's a problem. People associate with the people they're used to, and people associate with the names and the faces that they've grown to trust. And that's been TSN. And I don't know how you break that. To wrap it up, Sportsnet's been trying for a very long time, holding all of the cards. Every big event that the NHL controls is on Sportsnet. And the moment you open the door, even a little bit, to viewers, they're still choosing the other channel. I don't know at this point, 12 years into this, how you change that. Better personalities on the desk. Like, there are talented people there. This is not a blanket statement that everyone on Sportsnet... And the number of replies I got like that in both directions, but mostly in line with the numbers we're saying here. People seem to prefer TSN over Sportsnet. But the number of people that was like, Sportsnet's terrible and always has been... All right, that's not useful. That doesn't help me. Like, we're not getting anywhere with that. I hate panelist A and commentator B. And okay. What do you want me to do with that? What's the actual problem? What do you actually not like? Okay, you're sick of Ron McLean. Fine. I don't even know. Maybe this goes to how little of their broadcast I watched. I think David Amber was the big... was the James Duthie on their profile. And he's talented enough. He knows what he's doing. I know people are sick of Ron McLean on Hockey Night. I'm not quite there yet. I do think some of the act is a little bit played out. But I'm not as, oh my God, he's awful, as some people are. But there are a lot of names. There are a lot of people on that Sportsnet deadline broadcast that are just really bland. Don't have a lot of personality. Aren't all that interesting. And that's who you're throwing to in between every time Elliott breaks a trade. It's this pick and this player to Winnipeg from Chicago, and now back to 4 names you've never heard of in your life. That doesn't work. We know the BXs, right? We know the Bukowskises. We know the David Ambers, the Jen Botterls. Like, there are talented people on that broadcast. But they are being backed up by too many just really, really uninteresting people. And on TSN, there are a couple of uninteresting people, but they're more recognizable people, I guess, people we're more used to, or people you're just more willing to tolerate. Because soon we'll go back to whatever you like. Like, I'm not a big O-Dog guy, but people love O-Dog. There is a crowd out there for that. Everybody knows how good Mike Johnson is at this. Most people are smart enough to know how good Cheryl Pounder is at this. And so, yeah, I don't give a shit. I'll wait 3 minutes. The people on Sportsnet found out sooner than me which fourth line center was traded for a fourth round pick. But at least I was more entertained over here. And I don't know what Sportsnet's going to have to do to break that. But man, they have to break that. They have to find a way. When you have the rights to everything and you keep losing. I did have one asshole in the replies go, no one at Sportsnet cared about this at all. I'm like, I promise you they cared about this. When you have been spending billions for a decade and you have just locked in for another, I don't even know if this one was a decade or not, but for billions more, you care. Why are we always second when we give people a choice? I promise you they care. And thus far, they just haven't been able to fix it. Anyway, that's an awful long time to sit here and talk about why people watched one channel over another. But I'm interested in this kind of stuff. And according to the replies on Tuesday, many of you were interested in this as well. Strong takes on which channel you want to watch people just sit and talk about hockey for 8 hours. And maybe that should be the biggest takeaway for us all. Maybe the trade deadline show should start on both channels at 2:30 p.m. and wrap up around 4 p.m. instead of being about 8 hours long. I don't know what the normal ratings are on TSN during the day for the morning loop of SportsCenter and then some darts or billiards or whatever the hell. Don't even get me started on like some Stephen A. Smith nonsense. I don't care about any of that shit. But if 137,000 people throughout the day is significantly more than what they're normally drawing, we will continue to see this. But I did have a couple people say, nothing happens until 2 p.m. And those people are not wrong. Perhaps more sane than the rest of us. Hope you enjoyed this. I don't know how you could have. If you're still here, power to you. Thanks for hanging out with me and working through all that. But, even going through this, there are still some new replies popping up on this thing, and it had a lot more passion to it, this particular thread, than I expected that it would. So thanks for checking that out. Thanks for being here. Hope you'll stick around. We've got lots of great stuff here coming up over the next little while. Lots more on the craft beer front, certainly. If you missed it, as I said on Wednesday, Dean Brown, the legendary broadcast voice of the Ottawa Senators, was here. That was a lot of fun. Hope you go back and check that one out. We talked to him, of course, a little about the Ottawa Senators, but also, which teams are kind of sneaking into the playoffs here that might be really fun to watch. Talked a little about the Ducks, a little about the Sharks. Like, we are seeing kind of a turnover here as it pertains to, the trade deadline special. I mentioned off the top that last year, all these Canadian teams were buying. This year, all these Canadian teams are selling. Well, that means somebody's buying. Like Buffalo on the way up, that's going to be fun. Anaheim and San Jose on the way up, that's going to be fun. Like, we're seeing some turnover here that could be really good. Montreal, obviously. That's going to create some really interesting, fun, fresh matchups in the playoffs. So we did ask Dean about that and a bunch more. So that's up now at tallcanaudio.com from yesterday, or just the next one down here on whatever podcast app you're listening to me on right now. Let's get out of here. My name is Matt Robinson. Thank you so much for listening. If it is your first time here, make sure you've subscribed, and we will catch you all on the next one.